Prison Pentonville. Prison Pentonville informally. The Ville is an English Category B men's prison operated by Her Majesty's Prison Service. Pentonville Prison is not in Pentonville, but is located further north, on the Caledonian Road in the Barnsbury area of the London Borough of Islington, North London. In 2015, the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, described Pentonville as the most dramatic example of failure within the prison's estate. The prison today, history. The first modern prison in London, Millbank, opened in 1816. It had separate cells for 860 prisoners and proved satisfactory to the authorities, who started building prisons to deal with the rapid increase in numbers occasioned by the ending of capital punishment for many crimes. 2 Acts of Parliament allowed for the building of Pentonville Prison, designed by Captain Joshua Jebb, Royal Engineers. Construction started on 10 April 1840 and was completed in 1842. The cost was £84,186 . It had a central hall with 4 radiating wings, all visible to staff at the center. This design, intended to keep prisoners isolated, the separate system first used at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, was not, as is often thought, a panopticon. Officers had no view into individual cells from their central position. Pentonville was designed to hold 520 prisoners under the separate system, each having his own cell 13 feet 4 m long, 7 feet 2 m wide, and 9 feet 3 m high, with little windows on the outside walls and opening onto narrow landings in the galleries. They were admirably ventilated, a visitor wrote, and had a water closet, though these were replaced by communal, foul-smelling recesses because they were constantly blocked and the pipes were used for communication. The cost of keeping a prisoner at Pentonville was about 15 shillings a week in the 1840s. Prisoners were forbidden to speak to each other, and when out on exercise would tramp in silent rows, wearing brown cloth masks. In chapel, which they had to attend every day, they sat in cubicles, or coffins as the prisoners referred to them, their heads visible to the warder but hidden from each other. The chaplains were very influential, making individual cell visitations, urging the convicts to reform, and supervising the work of the schoolmasters. Mental disturbances were common. An official report admitted that for every 60,000 persons imprisoned in Pentonville, there were 220 cases of insanity, 210 cases of delusion, and 40 suicides. However, conditions were better and healthier than at Newgate and similar older prisons, and each prisoner was made to do work such as picking oakum, tarred rope, and weaving. The work lasted from 6 in the morning until 7 at night. The food ration was a breakfast of 10 ounces of bread and 3/4 of a pint of cocoa. Dinner was half a pint of soup or 4 ounces of meat, 5 ounces of bread, and 1 pound of potatoes. Supper, a pint of gruel and 5 ounces of bread. Pentonville became the model for British prisons. A further 54 were built to similar designs over 6 years, and hundreds throughout the British Empire. For instance, Pentonville was used as a model for the eventual construction of Caledonian Prison in Rattlejeted, Malta, by W. Lamb Arrowsmith in 1842. Execution site. Prisoners under sentence of death were not housed at Pentonville Prison until the closure of Newgate in 1902, when Pentonville took over executions in North London. Condemned cells were added and an execution room built to house Newgate's gallows. At the same time, Pentonville took over from Newgate the function of being the training location for future executioners. Irish revolutionary Roger Casement was hanged there on 3 August 1916, and his remains interred at the site until 1965. Udham Singh, the Indian revolutionary who shot Sir Michael O'Dwyer, governor of the Punjab, during the Amritsar massacre, was also held in custody and hanged at Pentonville 1940. Carl Hulton, involved in the Cleft Chin murder, was executed 8 March 1945. Between 1902 and 1961, a total of 120 men were executed at Pentonville, including Dr. Crippen and John Christie. All the executed were buried in unmarked graves in the prison cemetery located at 51-3244.5 and 0654.62 W. The final execution took place on 6 July 1961 when Edwin Bush, aged 21, was hanged. 21st century. In May 2003, an inspection report from Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons blamed overcrowding for poor standards at HMP Pentonville. The inspection found that basic requirements for inmates such as telephones, showers, and clean clothes were not being provided regularly enough. The report also noted a lack of access to education for inmates and inadequate specialized procedures for vulnerable prisoners. The inspection report also praised a number of areas of the prison, including the healthcare department, the prison drugs strategy, and programs for reducing offending behavior. A new hospital wing, built at a cost of £15. Months later, inspectors reported that despite the new facilities, primary care for prisoners, such as clinical supervision of nurses and drug dispensing practices, were inadequate. A year later, 14 prison officers at Pentonville were suspended after allegations of trafficking and inappropriate relations with inmates. In August 2007, a report from the Pentonville's Independent Monitoring Board stated that the prison was infested with rats and cockroaches and had insufficient levels of staff. The report also criticized the detention conditions for mentally ill inmates, the reception facilities for new prisoners, and the library provision at the jail. In October 2009, gross misconduct charges were brought against managers of Pentonville Prison after an investigation found that inmates had been temporarily transferred to HMP Wandsworth before inspections. The transfers, which included vulnerable prisoners, were in order to manipulate prison population figures. In February 2014, a report by Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons, Nick Hardwick, said there are huge challenges at Pentonville and that it will not have a viable future without a major refurbishment and extra staff. A further report released in June 2015 indicated that Pentonville had deteriorated even further since the previous inspection. The report highlighted that many inmates were left without basic provisions, including pillows and utensils, that there were mounds of rubbish on the floors, and cockroach infestations. Francis Cook, chief executive for the Howard League for Penal Reform, commented, "When a prison is asked to hold 350 more prisoners than it is designed for, we should not be surprised when it fails." A prisoner, Jamal Mahmood, was stabbed to death on 18 October 2016, and there were 6 other stabbings in the following weeks up to 8 November. In 2018, monitors found Pentonville was dilapidated, overcrowded, and porous to drugs, mobile phones, and weapons. Windows noted as insecure in 2016 are still insecure, vermin is rife, and many prisoners go for weeks without exercise in fresh air. Gang-related incidents during prayer meetings have increased. Staff are energetic and committed, but there were too few staff most of the time. Wings were shut down for 3 or 4 half-days a week. Activities and association time were limited. At the end of July 2018, the prison held 1215 men. The IMB singled out for praise a social enterprise set up to reduce recidivism by training prisoners in cooking and entrepreneurship. Prisoner escapes. The Prison Officers Association said that the escape of Baker and Whitlock followed years of underinvestment and staff cuts. Steve Gillen of the POA said, "The reality of the situation is the focus should be on government and their budget cuts that have created this situation. The basics of security aren't getting done simply because there is not enough staff to deal with the daily tasks." The prison's independent inspection watchdog described Pentonville as a soft target through the dilapidated state. Emily Thornberry MP called the escape the final straw and urged that the prison should be closed. "People don't seem to be safe inside Pentonville, and now it transpires inmates can escape." Escaped prisoners. 2006, prisoner escaped during transit between Pentonville Prison and a hospital facility. 2009, convicted arsonist Julian Chawford escaped by clinging on to the underside of the prison van which had delivered him to the jail from Snaresbrook Crown Court. He returned to the prison 4 days later, after giving himself up to police. 2012, convicted murderer John Massey escaped from within the prison confines at Pentonville on Wednesday, 27 June 2012, 1830 BST, and was recaptured in Kent 2 days later following what police described as an intelligence-led operation. 2016, two prisoners, Matthew Baker, 28, and James Whitlock, 31, escaped after they allegedly used diamond-tipped cutting equipment to break through cell bars before they scaled the perimeter wall. The escape was discovered when prison staff found pillows imitating bodies in the prisoners' beds. The public was warned not to approach the escaped prisoners. Baker was recaptured a few days later hiding in his sister's house in Ilford, with Whitlock found by police 6 days after the breakout. Notable former inmates. 1866, John Boyle O'Reilly, Irish activist and poet, spent 3 days in Pentonville before being transported to Millbank. 1879, Charles Peace, notorious burglar and murderer. 1895, Oscar Wilde spent time in Pentonville before being transferred to Wandsworth. 1909, who, while studying in England, assassinated British colonial officer William Curzon Willie. He was hanged at Pentonville, denied Hindu rights, and buried by the British authorities. Winston Churchill privately acknowledged Dingres's statement, the finest ever made in the name of patriotism. 1910, Hawley Harvey Crippen. Dr. Crippen was hanged in the prison in 1910 after being found guilty of murdering his wife. 1912, Frederick Seddon, the poisoner, was hanged in the prison in 1912. 1916, Sir Roger. His novel Darkness at Noon was published in England while he was still in Pentonville. 1946, Neville Heath was hanged in the prison in 1946 after having been convicted of murdering 2 women. 1950, Timothy Evans, wrongfully accused co-tenant of John Christie. 1953, John Christie was hanged in the prison. He wrote a book about the experience titled Nothing to Declare. 1984, George Best, football player, spent 7 days imprisoned in Pentonville for driving under the influence of alcohol and assault. 1984, Keith Allen, actor, sentenced to 3 months in Pentonville for destroying a bar. 1994, David Irving, Holocaust denier and writer, spent 10 days of a 3-month sentence for contempt of court. 1999, John Alford spent 6 weeks in Pentonville in 1999 after selling illegal drugs to a reporter. 2005, Pete Doherty, of the Libertines and Babyshambles, spent 4 nights in Pentonville in February 2005 while unable to make bail. He subsequently wrote a song about the prison, named Pentonville, which is on the Babyshambles album Down in Albion. He spent a further 6 weeks in Pentonville between May and June 2011 for cocaine possession. 2009, Boy George, for the assault and false imprisonment of a male escort. 2010, George Michael, for drug driving offenses. 2017, Nile Ranger, for money laundering and fraud.